Good evening, folks. And here's some non-news news that's been coming out today and yesterday. It's been reported, I think, years ago about George's opinion of what Disney did to his scripts or his creative input. And I don't know. This is not an argument for or against the new trilogy of Star Wars films. When you sell your IP to whomever, they have full control to do what they want unless speculated other or stated otherwise in the contract what's going to happen. So if you spend billions of dollars on the biggest movie franchise ever, yeah, you totally talk to George and say, hey, George, what do you think? But you would have no reason to listen to him and do everything he says. That would be silly. That would be like buying a Ferrari and having him drive it. Like the dealership guy drive it. I suppose, like, why would you do that? If you have this big world of any kind of story you want to tell within it that people are going to flock to in crazy amounts of numbers, yeah, you're damn right you're going to do brand new crazy things with it. You should. Now, it doesn't mean you retcon everything, which is a whole other issue with George. But, you work within the universe. You put things in boxes. You try to define them better. You describe them better. You give them more details, new characters, that sort of thing. You do fun stuff your imagination would go crazy with. So this idea with George as this sort of visionary for Star Wars is about as deep as it gets. Like, that's it. That's what George is. He's a visionary. And he managed to get the funding. He managed to get the people and all that to get Star Wars off the ground. But if he did not have that money and that those people behind him to tell him what works and what doesn't and why, then none of this, like the original trilogy, would not have happened. And we can see that by his other works. His original one, his debut, is in 1971, a very strange sci-fi story called THX 1138. It's a dystopian story about a guy who's in this, it's kind of like an underground bunker-style civilization of people constantly taking drugs to decrease their humanity and be efficient worker bees. And everyone's bald. And it's very, it's your typical harsh life dystopian world. Plays with kids from an early age lose their humanity and all that. He's trying to break out. This one character, the main character is this rebel of the group. Kind of a boring movie, kind of a weird, boring, slow movie. And visually, all these other things that were going on, pretty cool. Lots of practical things going on, set design, etc. But nothing to write home about, nothing special. One of those weird 70s flicks, the B movie generation. Not to say I know these movies. I've watched a few, but they're just so bad. And like, ooh, this is strange. So George is not known for his scripts. And you can tell that also from Willow. Yep, he wrote Willow. And he's been nominated for all sorts of bad awards, the Golden Raspberries for worst director, worst picture, worst screenplay. Star Wars Episode 1, worst director, Episode 2, worst picture, worst screenplay. So apparently won the Empire Award for best sci-fi fantasy for Episode 3. That's interesting. Arguably the best in the prequel trilogy, because there was actually some drama there for us to care about, as opposed to watching a little kid run around in a spaceship blowing up space stations and taking part in a high-stakes race. But the stuff that we already knew, we heard about years ago, in regards to George not liking the directions as Star Wars was taken, has nothing to do with the actual quality of what we were given in Episode 8, but more to do with them just disregarding his scripts, because his scripts were bizarre. I mean, you can just go through the article here on Games Radar, but, he even mentions, the next 3 Star Wars films were going to get into a microbiotic world. But there's this world of creatures that operate differently than we do. I call them the Wills. The Wills are the ones who actually control the universe. They feed off the Force. So now he's talking about midichlorians being the servants of the Wills or the spokesmen for the Wills. And it's just making a retcon and then adding this other force on top of that. You can call it a deus ex, you can call it some other celestial being, some sort, I don't know what you would call the wills, but to have this organism that eats the force, or whatever the hell he's, like, you're making something complicated and you're not providing value. You're not taking something complicating and making it simpler. You're doing the opposite. There was nothing wrong with the concept of the force in the first 3 films. That was the precursor for a whole bunch of books that came out before the Phantom Menace ever hit. And because of that retcon, you open up a whole can of worms. So George wanted to keep going with that idea. He wanted to keep going. He wanted to not do a second retcon, but just to add more stuff. And the argument for good writing or believable writing is you add more details to allow your audience to process what's going on. So, if there's all this stuff happening, with all this descriptions happening about something, it's more believable. Well, not when you're talking about a mystical force that binds you, but it's only in living things, but you can manipulate solid matter that's non-living or non-organic or whatever. Like, you started getting into science now, and that's fine, but hard science was never what Star Wars was about. Star Wars was always sci-fi. It was always about big ideas distilled into simplified, understood, and personified concepts like Luke Skywalker, like Obi-Wan, like Darth Vader. You grasped them very quickly, and everyone could identify on some level, this is the everyman, this is the hero character, he's the fish out of water, he has a revenge story going on, is he going to kill his father? There's all these things you can latch on to. But when you start talking about the magic of a universe, and you don't know how to tell fantasy properly, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to put that into a story, especially a prequel, especially a retcon, especially whatever 7, 8, 9 was supposed to be. So the argument here that people are going to say, or have been saying, is that, well, if they just listened to Georgie, then we wouldn't have gotten episode 8. It's like, okay, but you're comparing apples, like a real apple, to an imaginary conceptual orange, which is just a bad idea. You know what? Any script, even a very poorly written story, can be made into a good movie, even a great movie, with just the right editor, with just the right director. So, George is an amazing visionary who got the right money, he got the right people behind him at the right time. And yes, he believed in the hero's journey. He had all these wonderful influences. The Bhagavad Gita, all sorts of Indian influences. Joseph Campbell, of course. He had background in filmmaking, so he was the right guy for then. Was he the right guy for the prequels? Arguably not. It was his baby. He can do whatever he likes, of course. But something broke down in communication between how he made his movie or his movies in the first place and what happened with the prequels. I don't know what that was. I'm not a behind-the-scenes kind of guy. But this is a non-news story. George, you made your sale. You gave up the rights. You're just the guy who cashed that check. So, thanks for listening, guys. I'm not going to harp on George too much or Johnson. I think enough people can do that for me. But thanks for listening, and have yourself a great evening.